And, Morgane, one of the things that people come to me with is like, well, you're lucky because you're outgoing and you're audacious. And no, it wasn't. I just thought if it can all be ripped away, I better not wait for anything. And so I started to think about making friends with fear and, kind of recalibrating relationship with rejection. And then once I saw the way my life unfolded by living this way, of course, I wanted to share it with other people. And, I have 3 kids that are watching me live my life as well. And I want them to see the perceived failures. I don't really consider anything a failure anymore. And the response. I mean, it's all supposed to be about fun and learning. And I think a lot of us just get stuck.
Hi, it's Morgane Michael, and this is Hindsight 101, where you're going to get practical strategies for designing a life that inspires you, one life edit at a time. Hello, and welcome to Hindsight 101 with me, your host, Morgane Michael, and I'm here with Anne-Marie Anderson, and she is the author of Cultivating Audacity. I'm so excited to have her here today because she's going to talk to us a little bit about how do we align ourselves day to day with the broader trajectory for our life. She's not only an author, but she's also a keynote speaker and a 3-time Emmy Award-winning broadcaster. And I'm so delighted to welcome her on the show. Welcome, Anne-Marie.
Morgane, I'm so happy to be here to talk with you about this.
I have to say, as someone who actually works in television, I was a little bit trepidatious to have you on because this is your gig. And I very much feel like I do this because it's a hobby. So I've learned a lot from people like you, watching people like you, and I'm always in awe of the magic that you make on TV and otherwise. So thank you for the work that you do.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I love to work and I love to help other people that are in the same area really find their comfort zone in television. So I love you're doing it too.
Awesome. So I want to dig into essentially the reason that you first wrote your book, Cultivating Audacity. And I have to say, before we even get there, I love the title because I think whenever we are we find ourselves in a position where we're sort of stuck or we're not aligned with that life that we sort of envisioned, as the 8-year-old version of ourselves, or we think about, when we get to the point of being 80 years old, we look back on our life and we think, wow, what a life. What got you to that point where you wanted to write this book for people?
I didn't realize that I had been living audaciously since I was about 24. I had an incident that happened at work where, briefly put, somebody very young and fit lost their lives at work, and he was newly married and starting his dream job, and I performed CPR on him and he didn't survive. And I remember thinking, wow, if you could be, and he was the nicest man, if you can be newly married and super fit, getting your dream job and have it all ripped away in an instant, I don't want to wait for anything ever. And, Morgane, one of the things that people come to me with is like, well, you're lucky because you're outgoing and you're audacious. And no, it wasn't. I just thought if it can all be ripped away, I better not wait for anything. And so I started to think about making friends with fear and, kind of recalibrating relationship with rejection. And then once I saw the way my life unfolded by living this way, of course, I wanted to share it with other people. And, I have 3 kids that are watching me live my life as well. And I want them to see the perceived failures. I don't really consider anything a failure anymore. And the response. I mean, it's all supposed to be about fun and learning. And I think a lot of us just get stuck.
I totally agree. I think that stuckness is essentially, it's sort of a turning point for a lot of people. And we get to maybe it's a certain age or a certain period in our overall career or the stage that we're at. And we look at ourselves in the mirror. We look at our general point that we've come to. And we sort of have a choice to make. Do we want to continue and compound the various choices, good or bad, or sort of neutral, that we've made to continue in that general trajectory? Or do we get to redesign, reauthor the life that we want for ourselves? And so I really love that idea of acknowledging and making friends with fear. I love this story. You talk about this in your book as well. There's a point at which I think it was before you actually launched into your career, and it was sort of a turning point for you, where you had a job interview and it didn't go so well. Do you know the one that I'm talking about?
Sure.
Can you speak to that too?
Do. Yeah. When I first graduated college, I knew I wanted to work in television, but maybe more importantly, I knew what I didn't want to do, right? Like technology was too overwhelming. Math gives me a headache. I'm not good at business. I didn't want to work outside all the time, but I also didn't want to work at a desk. I always say some of us build backwards. And so I got an interview for a 6-month temporary job at ESPN, and I did not get the job. As I was interviewing, the man who was interviewing me asked me to analyze the Mariners bullpen, the Seattle Mariners. And I froze. I didn't know anything about it. And I just never recovered from it. And at the end of the interview, he said, well, thanks very much, but you're not what we're looking for. And I was so mad at myself when I left, like just so frustrated. Like, really? You choked. Like you choked. You didn't even. And so I wrote a letter to him afterwards. And I said, thank you so much for the time. Because back in those days, Morgane, we wrote with like a pen and paper and like licked a stamp, as unsanitary as that now seems, and stuck it on there. And I just said, I don't think I really explained what value I could add. And if you were to hire me, I'd be different from all the guys you have who can spit out stats and numbers and analyze the Mariners bullpen. And there was something in that audacity that he liked. And I told him if I needed to do a story on the Mariners bullpen, I'd look it up. And I always say to people, that's a little bit different kind of audacity than what I talked about and cultivated later on, because that was out of desperation, because I didn't have a job. And I was going to end up living with my parents, who I loved, but I didn't want to live with. And so that one was born out of desperation, but it was probably the first audacious move I made. And I ended up getting the job, and I stayed 35 years. I'm working for ESPN tomorrow.
Okay, well, on that, I love that. And I think on that note, when we think about, I have a lot of people who are in their early 20s who are, at that point where they're graduating university or they're doing some kind of work, and they want to look forward to perhaps different careers, or they want to really apply for those tricky jobs. What advice would you have for them in terms of differentiating themselves? And I know this kind of is a slight departure from the book in many ways, but I think it's a through line that fits. What advice would you have for them as, they maybe have their eye on something that seems outside of maybe their current level of expertise or their current skill level, but would you give them the advice to go for it? What would you tell them?
Absolutely. First of all, we don't have to stay within any boundaries. This conversation can go anywhere you want. And the big thing for me is use your differences. They get so many people sitting in that chair time after time that are telling them that what they think that they want to hear. So if you're different, then use that. If you work 40 hours a week while you were getting your degree, use that. There's always a way to kind of embrace what's different about you. And I think the thing I would tell people in their 20s and 30s, especially women who think about like breaking the glass ceiling. That's what they always like, break the glass ceiling. It, for me, is get off the sticky floor. We sit on that floor waiting until the right time, when we have all the qualifications and we have all the resources. That time never comes, Morgane. It never comes. So get off the sticky floor and start going for opportunities. You may not get the opportunity you want right away, but it'll open up something else. I promise.
I love this too. And I think you're absolutely right. You're right. I think there is sort of this proving that we need to do. And I would overgeneralize maybe to women as well. But this idea that we need to have all of our ducks in the row, that we need to have a really clear plan of where we're going, and that we are really airtight on our qualifications, our credentials, so that there's no doubt in anybody's mind that we are the right person for the job. And I think you're right. That day never really comes. And a lot of people end up starting before they're ready and build the plane in the air as they're going, right?
Yes, exactly. You got to give yourself some grace. So many of us think they're smarter than me. They're more prepared than me. They're more qualified than me. And who says? Who says? And it just, I think so many times we're so hard on ourselves about like, when. I'll do it when, right? That's the classic. I'll do it when I have the time, when I have the money, when I have all the qualifications. Waiting doesn't work. The time is now for you to start making some moves. And here's the thing, Morgane. Let's say you and I apply for a job at the same time. Okay. We both have about, let's say 50% of the credentials, and neither one of us are going to get the job, right? I applied for it, but you don't, because you only have 50% of the credentials. You're going to wait until you're ready. So at 65% of the credentials, I apply again, but you're still waiting to get the credentials. So you don't apply. I do. I don't get the job. at 85%, you and I both decide to apply, well, I'm going to get that job over you because they've already seen me a couple of times. I know the process and they've watched me add skills. We could have the same qualifications, or you could be more qualified than I was. But because you were on that sticky floor waiting, they didn't get to witness you building your career. It does not hurt to leave earlier than you think you should.
I love that. I know you're a coach. You coach people in business and otherwise. And I've done a little bit of coaching when it comes to career and leadership. And my advice is always the same thing. Leap before you're ready, because you'd be surprised at how much you take for granted when it comes to your own skills. So much of what you have to offer, it might actually be a blind spot for you. You may not actually be able to see your skill because it comes easily to you, or it seems like second nature. And for many people, the skills and the strengths that you have end up being something that many people work very, very hard to cultivate. So don't underscore yourself if you do have those skills, or you do have things that you're particularly good at, because not all people do. And so, like you said, lean into those strengths. I want to...
But let me ask you something else too. If
Yeah.
you don't get the job, what have you lost? You didn't have the job in the first place. So they can't fire you because they didn't hire you. But what you have now is information. That's what I always tell people. Like, okay, maybe you don't have what you need. You just got some information and some data. And
Right.
that itself is valuable.
And you have the experience of going, well, I've sat in a room with unfamiliar people in an unfamiliar experience or environment, and I have brought a certain level of expertise or caliber to the conversation, and I can build on that. I think also I remember when I first went to teacher school, like 20 years ago, when there weren't a lot of jobs in education. And so I remember telling myself, actually, I haven't talked about this at all. I remember telling myself, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to interview for as many different schools in one of those career fair things that I can in order to get hired. And I literally sat down with, I think it was 13 different districts. And it was unbelievable what that gave me in terms of expertise, experience, a sense of calm. When I actually walked into the district that I wanted, I was like, I've done this 12 times. Here we go.
Yep.
I'm ready, And I think, you get the kinks out with the practice, and not everything needs to be a win, because peaks and valleys are necessary, right?
Yes, absolutely. I always say to people, like, my first time on television was horrible, of course, right? Who's good on television their first time? The only thing that was better about my second time was that it wasn't the first time, right? It was just as bad. But then I got a little bit better, a little bit better. I was also horrible my 15th, my 25th, my 30th. But I got a little bit more information each time. And more than that, I got the confidence that I would survive whatever the outcome was of that. Was I embarrassed or judged? Sure. But I survived that and rose to do it again.
A little bit about what holds people back. You talk about this in your book, that there are certain you've talked about them like perceived failures, but also this idea that we have a scarcity mindset, an idea that maybe there are certain things that hold us back. What would you say from your experience are some of the elements that hold most people back from being audacious, whether it's applying for that job, it is trying out for a team, it's leaving your marriage, all these types of things? What is it that holds us back?
I have come across the same 4 things over and over again. It seems to always be related to fear of embarrassment, failure, judgment, whatever you want to call it, time, money, or your inner critic. It always fits into one of those boxes. And I tell people, that's okay. You don't need to push those away. You need to get curious about it. What is it that's in your way? It's going to come up and bite you anyway, whatever it is that you're afraid of. So get curious about it. What is your inner voice saying to you? And how much power does it have? And why are you letting it make decisions for you? It can still be there. Your inner voice can still be there saying you're not good enough, you're not ready, you're not whatever. But why are you letting it drive?
Yeah. And do you have questions? Because I think sometimes, what I found with people is it's really easy to find solutions or to find those points when you're looking at other people's problems. When you look at your own challenges, it can be very, very challenging to actually pinpoint, okay, what is rooting that fear? Or what is my deal with lack of resources? What's that coming from? Or what specifically? Is it time? Is it money? Do you have a set of questions, or do you have one or two things that can help people to kind of just figure it out?
Yes, for sure. First of all, you had mentioned the book. In the book, I go through each one of those barriers very specifically. There's exercises and all kinds of things you can do. But as a general overview, the first thing I would want to tell you people is to embrace this concept of the front row. I have a front row group of people, men and women, who have nothing at stake other than to cheer me on, to push me, to lift me up, and to challenge me. And I'll tell you the big secret to curating a front row. It's probably not your mom. It's probably not your best friend, because they want you to stay safe. Your front row are people who are doing their own badassery things themselves, right? And you want to cheer them on. But they're the ones who will shine the light. And they will tell you, if you curate this and announce to them, you're in my front row. Here's what I want to do, and here's how it is. And they will say to you, okay, so you're complaining about time, let's say, for example, and I have something called the urgency fallacy, where we're all doing things that are urgent all the time, right? There's that email, that phone call, that text, that kid that's hungry, that's whatever it is for you. And we say, when we're done with all things urgent, when we have time, then I'll do what's important to me. And what's important pushes you closer to your values, your visions, that life that you want to live. Your front row can work with you in saying, well, you're hiding behind what's urgent all the time. Because the fact is, almost anything urgent can wait 15 minutes. Truly, anything urgent. I mean, if your listeners have kids and they say, Mommy, I'm hungry, depends on how old they are, of course. But you know what really frustrates my kids that are teenagers now? And they say, Mom, I'm hungry. And I go, dude, same. They go crazy. They're like, well, but I was like, yeah, but I'm going to do this first, and I'll get back to you in 15 minutes. I promise you, you won't starve.
And the toast is right there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All of it. But it can be whatever it is. But we hide behind our urgency. And that's just one example of a barrier.
That's so interesting. I also think I would consider myself a creative, and something that I've recently discovered is that I will hide behind my creativity in a way. So there are times when I'm like, and I think that this is a project thing. So maybe creativity doesn't fit for the listener, but I think sometimes I will be like, okay, this project feels a little tricky right now, so I'm going to go invent a new one. And I'm going to go pour my energy into that. And so I've had to actively, this year, it kind of has been an intentional goal of mine to actively sit on my hands as it relates to bringing on new projects or new books or new creativity, because there is an element of hiding. Like, let's make this really good right now, what is already, instead of adding and piling on more things. And I think when we think about tasks sometimes, we add to our to-do list because maybe there's a perception that, yeah, there's an urgent sense that we need to serve others. But then I think also, maybe again, back to this whole female thing, is that we feel like we need to have a list of things to do in order to justify our existence or something. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yes, entirely. And it doesn't really get us anywhere, does it? There's no trophies. Like, nobody's giving me a trophy for getting it all done. For me, it's like, I hate doing expense reports, for example, right? Every time I come home from broadcasting for ESPN, I have an expense report. So instead, I used to want to clean the house, right? Because certainly somebody's going to give me a trophy for having a clean house, which of course has never arrived. But I would get consumed in that because I wanted to avoid this. And once I started having conversations with myself, that's a really simple idea that it can go obviously much deeper, especially as you mentioned, leaving a relationship. There's a lot to do there to dig through the finances and figure that all out. I'm divorced, and it was really difficult to make time to figure out, okay, here are the things and these are the it was uncomfortable. But I stopped shoving things down. I stopped saying, okay, I don't want to feel this. And that's where your front row can really shine a light in areas that you don't want to. And because you picked them, because you picked the people in your front row and you gave them a vote and you got rid of all the other ones that you thought maybe were going to be in there but shouldn't be in there, you trust them because you're self-selected them, and they will show you what you need to know.
Is burnout, overwhelm, and low motivation holding your team back? Well, I help people like you in education, the corporate world, and in healthcare to regain a sense of themselves through simple life edits. All you have to do to transform your team is contact me for your next workshop or keynote. That is so interesting. So when it comes to your front row, and probably, to drill it down to numbers doesn't really maybe make sense for this, but how many people do you have in your front row? Can you actively think about them right now?
Sure. Well, I have different front rows. So, for
Okay.
example, I have a fitness front row. And when I don't show up to work out, these friends call me, right? Because they're interested in their own fitness and they need me to help them stay afloat. So there's the fitness front row. There's a front row for when I divorced of friends who I told, and it was very difficult to do. My brothers were in my front row for that. There is a professional front row I have of friends who are pushing and trying to create and drive themselves and make themselves uncomfortable. So, there was a front row for my book, and my ex-husband was in my front row for my book, because we're good friends, we're raising the kids together, and we wanted them to be able to live audaciously. And so there would be times where I'm talking to him and he's talking about something in his career, and I'm like, well, let me ask you some questions. And he's like, oh boy, here we go, digging in. And I said, well, you invited me here to ask you these challenging questions.
I think that's so interesting. I like that you have, I call them kind of buckets. So whatever areas in your life, whether it's fitness, it's your wellness, it's your career, it's your children, it's your parenting, your relationships, that there are those different buckets. And I really like the idea of having a front row for each of those. I don't know, it's interesting when I first started my podcast back in 2018, I sort of expected, I guess, my front row to be my friends and family. And what turned out very quickly was that those people who I thought I would rely on to support that sort of creative or professional endeavor absolutely loved me within that, but they weren't really who it was for. It was for
That's
other
right.
people. And I think finding that out, was really interesting for me, and just kind of a process of understanding. And anybody that I've worked with who is, in the process of writing a book or doing anything creative like that, that's been kind of an aha realization. So I really like this concept of the front row as a way to put boundaries or an understanding around that. Is not everybody's your front row. Your best friend may not be your front row. Your mom may not be your front row. Really
Right.
good.
And maybe somebody you haven't met, but somebody who's already doing something that you want to do. And because they were once there, they'll be generous enough to share things with you.
Let's talk a little bit about, no problem. No problem. Just making note of that for my editor. We'll try and cut
Thank you
that
very
out.
much.
No problem.
Thank you.
And I'm actually, while we're at it, I'm just going to do one of these because this is driving me
Oh, it's
absolutely
so
nuts.
pretty though. It really is.
There, can actually see my face. So now we're at minute 22:08. Love it. So let's talk a little bit about this concept of worth it versus reckless, because you make a distinction between being bold and reckless. And sometimes that can be a bit confusing. Could you give a little bit of insight into that?
Sure, because, all right, audacity by definition is the willingness to take bold risks. And I think there's some people, first of all, there's people who shy away from the word risk big time, which I didn't even know that the subtitle for the book is Dismantle Doubt and Let Yourself Win. I wanted it to be Dismantle Doubt and Take Bold Risks, but there's people who freak out at the word risk itself.
Right.
Risk, there's worth it and there's reckless. I'm not advising you go out there and just swing for the fences, recklessly and move across country, even though you have a family and 3 kids to take care of and quit your job. You need to evaluate what's reckless and what's worth it. And it changes at different times in your life. So you need to evaluate kind of what could be lost, and what could be gained. And it's a very easy scale once you're willing to look at it. I mean, you don't quit your job if you've got other people to support through your thing. If you're in an unhealthy situation, an unhealthy relationship, yeah, you need to get out of that. But you need to figure out the support system ahead of time that you can build your front row to get you out of that situation. So it's a matter of really being honest with yourself. You can check in with your front row. What are the potential consequences of this risk, this move versus another?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not going to kill you, I'd say go for it. But you need to be honest about it, because I have seen people who put everything, all their money into this one endeavor, you know them too. And then they're like, gee, it didn't work out. Okay, well, did you do all the other vetting ahead of time
Yeah.
to do that? And that's where you really need to look at fear, time, money, and your inner critic, and listen to what your cues are telling you.
I think this is really important because, when it comes to a lot of self-development, people are saying, burn the boats.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Go all in. You can't get the success if you don't go all in. And I'd say that works if you're 18 years old, 20 years
Yep.
old, and you
Yep.
don't have responsibilities. You don't have a mortgage. You don't have children who need you to take care of them actively. You also have time on your side where you have the capacity and the endurance, frankly, to be able
Yeah.
to work for hours if you need to hustle on the side. You could do a night job. Like, you can be scrappy at that age. But when you're in a season of life, as you say, where you have responsibilities that tether you on a deep level to other people's well-being, it is a consideration. And I think, I am also divorced, and that was certainly something that came to mind. And this concept of what can be gained felt bigger than what could be lost. And so I
Right.
tended to think that would have been, and it was the right move for me, but it's not always the right move for everybody. And I think in this day and age, depending on where you live, resources can be a significant consideration. And so I like that you acknowledge that. And I think slow and steady and consistent can also yield really positive results and can push you in that trajectory and that overall desirable place in your life. And I think myself, I like this idea of 1% shifts and small, measured, but consistent output that will shift that overall trajectory, because there is something to be gained for that.
Yes, but I will challenge you on this.
Yes, go.
Sometimes
Yes.
people will hide behind that little small
Mm,
move,
okay.
right? They'll say, okay, I can dip my toes in there. To your point, when I was 26, I was living at ESPN's headquarters in Bristol, Connecticut, and shoveling snow all day and working at 6 at night to 3 in the morning. And I loved the job, but I hated my off hours. And I went to my boss at ESPN and said, hey, can I be LA bureau producer? I'm a beach volleyball player. And he said, well, we already have a bureau producer in Los Angeles. And I said, no, man, like that's what makes this conversation so awkward. Yeah. And he laughed and he was like, yeah, all right. So as we talked about it, he said, I tell you what, give me 2 more years.
Huh.
And if we haven't made you LA bureau producer by then, what have you really lost?
Mm.
And I said to him, 2 years in my 20s. I wasn't married. I didn't own a property. I didn't have any kind of bills. And so I ended up making the decision to leave ESPN. And it's that dream job.
Yeah.
But I thought, I'm not enjoying my life. When I ask people what you want to do with your life and they give me jobs, it makes me crazy, because I'm like, is that all you want to do? Like, what do you want your days and nights to look like? So I drove cross country. I gave my notice, obviously, whatever time they needed, drove cross country. And when I arrived in Los Angeles, ESPN hired me back to do a few different assignments. Well, by the end of that year, I was back to full time, making double the money from
Wow.
ESPN.
Yeah.
Because I didn't make it for the money. I made the decision for my life. And because I was happier and living my life that way, I think the rest of it unfolded. I've never made a decision based on money. And I know for people where money is a challenge, they're thinking, oh, yeah, you must have money. No, I was making $15,000 a year. I did not have money.
Yeah.
But I knew that I wanted to enjoy my days and nights, and I would work with whatever restrictions I had.
Where do you think you got that from? Because I think not everybody thinks about it from that top, that really broad perspective of what do I want my life to look like, versus I would say a lot of people are just trying to, maybe make ends meet, or they feel like that's what my parents did. So I want to, like, where did you get that from? That really broad perspective on how do I want to really craft my life? What do I want this in a design kind of framework to look like?
It really came from that moment as I was performing CPR on a friend of mine. And up until that moment, I think I was grinding just like the rest of us, just grinding away. And I thought, well, if that's all I'm going to get, if it's just going to collapse at some point, then I need to really enjoy what it is. Now, obviously, that's a very extreme example, and it was a very tragic story, but it was a real moment for me where I thought, I just don't know. He passed away. Peter did. His name's Peter. I'm close with his family, and they've given me permission to talk about him and write about him. When he was 37. And so when I was 37, that's when I had my first child. When I was 37, that's when I left ESPN full time and went on air full time. And I still work for ESPN, but I was freelance. At 37, something in me shifted because this happened much earlier. But when I hit 37, I thought, wow, this is all bonus time.
Yeah.
And it really is because of that experience. And of course, I don't want anybody else to have that kind of tragic experience, but rather to just think about, what if it did go away? I mean, I know it sounds so dramatic, but I've really seen it up close.
Yeah.
I want to enjoy my days. I don't know how many I have.
Yeah. And I think that that's the key. And I think these wake up calls, I know people also, this is maybe a little morbid, but I know also people whose parents have passed at a particular age. And when they hit that age, same thing. There was sort of like an awakening that happened where they're like, oh my gosh, like a wake up call, right? Talk to me a little bit about what are some tactical things that we can do. So maybe we've hit this point. We're at a fork in the road. I just turned 40, for example. So it was my birthday and I'm like, hey, it's real time now for whatever reason. That felt like
happy birthday.
Thank you. That felt like a real moment for me. And what is it that we do if we're not in a place where we want to be? What do we do?
Okay, first of all, 50's better than 40, just so you know. It keeps getting better. So enjoy all of this. What you do is think about, write about what's working and what's not working. What would it look like? There's this very popular Chat GPT exercise that just came up after I wrote the book about asking them about your ideal life, right? I've been doing that well before Chat GPT. But use the same idea. What do you want your days and nights to look like? What do you dream about doing? I go through it very step by step in the book, where I encourage the readers to create a funnel. And a lot of people have heard about Ikigai. I don't know if you've heard about that Japanese concept, right?
But tell us. Yeah.
Yeah, but what does the world need? What are you good at? What do you enjoy? And what can you be paid to do? Right. And I always give people the example. I really love to garden. I absolutely love to garden. Certainly people will pay for a good gardener. The world needs gardeners. Nobody's paying me to garden. I kill everything. Like, it's a miracle the kids are still alive, but I can't keep a basil plant alive. I don't know what the deal. I've tried singing to them. That's probably the issue now that I think about it. I'm not a good voice. But finding that area. Now, the thing about Ikigai, as it's accepted in the Western culture, is at the center of those 4 questions, right? What do you love, or what do you enjoy? What are you good at? Because you got to be honest with each other. I love gardening. I'm not good at it. What does the world need and what can you be paid for? At the center of that is your purpose. That's the Westernized version. My theory is that it's not just one thing. It's not one thing that is at the center. For me, I like to travel internationally. I like spending time with my children. I love talking about sports. I love sharing knowledge. I love hearing about other people. I love empowering women. So all of that stuff encompasses my life. Have people done the drill? Have people done the drill? And so instead of an Ikigai Venn diagram, I talk about a funnel of all those things and what you get with at the end of the funnel when you filter everything through, what you love, what you're good at, what you enjoy, what the world needs, all of that. What's at the bottom of that funnel is what you should be searching for in your life and creating. And so for me now, I have a job in the summers where I travel internationally. They fly me all around the world. And I said to them as part of my contract, can I bring my children? So my children come with me. I've got one who's gone to Brazil with me, Poland, another one's coming to Turkey with me this summer, because that's an important part to me. But it's also about talking about sports. It's about sharing with other people and empowering women. So I encourage people for step 1 to start thinking about what it is that you really value in your life, personally and professionally, your free time. What do you want? I got sunshine outside right now. I paid dearly for it in California, but that's something that was important to me. And I think that's step one, because you can't, if you're randomly swinging, you can't find which one unless you've really thought about it.
Oh, you're absolutely right. That is so good. If we
There
were
is
to,
one other thing I wanted to
yeah.
tell you. I did to help people narrow it down, and I'm not just here to promote the book. I wanted to talk to you about it, but I will say there is a a quiz, I will say, at the end of the book, where it will ask you some questions to help you figure it out, because sometimes it's your career life, sometimes it's your health and fitness, sometimes it's your personal and relationships. And one area can be doing great while another area isn't doing well at all. I took my own quiz when I wrote it, and I was like, I need to put more time into my relationships with my friends. And so I shifted my own way of being in the world when I took my own, quiz, saying, here's where I need more value right now. And it
And
can
that's
change throughout your life.
And that's the thing, I guess, about seasons is nothing is ever really finite. Things are dynamic and they shift and they change. And such a beautiful thing about that is you might be really nailing it in one particular aspect or domain of your life and absolutely perceived failure, but failing on the other side, like you said,
Absolutely.
in your relationships or at work, maybe you're really nailing it with like relaxation, but you got to put a little more time into the
Yeah.
work to level up in the way that you want to. So,
Or your health, or your health and fitness.
yeah. And I think this is where we see a lot of research coming out right now, specifically with women too, but just around, you got to be putting time into prioritizing that vessel that we call our bodies, because it holds us, it takes care of us. And so we want to do the same for it. And that's been something that's been very much top of mind for me, healthy eating, but also healthy living, supplements, and then also the way that I like to work out and more strength training and walking and trying to make that social as much as possible. It's been really good.
Great.
So talk to me now, where can people find your work if they're looking to maybe be coached by you, to have you do a keynote for them, to work with you in some capacity, or to get your amazing book? Where can they find you?
Oh, thank you. The easiest way is to go to my website, AnneMarieAnderson.com. There's an E on the end of Anne. I do all kinds of events in terms of if you're looking for a keynote. The book is called Cultivating Audacity. It's available in any bookstore you want, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, pages, your local bookstores as well. And of course, you can find me on Instagram. There's nothing I love more than seeing someone create a life they're excited to wake up to every day. And that really is what floats my boat. And I believe it is possible for everybody.
I love that so much. Me too. Thank you so, so much, Anne-Marie, for being on today. And if you were to leave my audience with one message, what would you say you'd like them to keep in mind as they're finishing off this conversation with us?
I'd like them to think about making friends with fear. I feel like we push it away so much. What if you allowed fear to guide you? It seems so counterintuitive, but if when you felt that fear, you were curious about it instead. What is it that I'm afraid of? Being judged? Because then what would happen? Well, people wouldn't like me. Okay, so people didn't like you, then what would happen? And keep going down that rabbit hole. And I think once you get really comfortable with fear and failure, you become unstoppable. It's
agree.
been so freeing for me.
I love that so much. Thank you so much. What a fun conversation. I know my listeners are going to love this. It's so inspiring. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. And I think just to have somebody who wants the best for people is so lovely. So thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. I enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Kindsight 101 with me, your host, Morgane Michael. It has been an absolute pleasure. I always learn so much, but really, I want to hear what you've learned. Please find me on social media by searching Morgane Michael and reach out. I always love to hear from people.